He spent years caring for the little creek behind his home, until the HOA decided it didn't fit their vision of perfection. What happened next destroyed everything they'd built, and proved that nature doesn't forgive arrogance. Water was everywhere, crawling through living rooms, swallowing gardens, and turning driveways into shallow ponds. People were shouting, wading knee-deep in brown, murky water, carrying boxes, pets, whatever they could save. The air smelled like wet earth and oil. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Devin Rucker stood barefoot in what used to be his backyard, staring at the concrete wall that had caused it all. The same wall the Homeowners Association swore would beautify the neighborhood. Now it was a dam, a man-made mistake that had turned 27 homes into swamps. Reporters showed up before the county trucks did. Their cameras panned over the flooded lawns, the ruined furniture, and the people crying on porches. A drenched woman yelled at a camera crew, "We told them! We told them this would happen!" And in that moment, the story stopped being about property damage. It became something else, about arrogance, negligence, and how a handful of people's vanity had drowned an entire neighborhood. Devin didn't say much that day. He just stood there in his soaked jeans, his hands clenched and shaking, watching the current drag his lawn chairs away. He had warned them. He had sent the emails. He had printed the maps. And still, they had laughed it off. The same people who once told him the creek was nothing but a ditch. But before the storm, before the cameras, before the shouting and lawsuits, there was peace. The kind of peace you don't notice until it's gone. The creek had been small, but it was alive. You could hear it trickling on quiet mornings, smell the grass after rain, see the reflection of kids tossing pebbles into the water while their parents chatted across the fence. Devin kept it clear year-round. He wasn't paid to. He just cared. He said it kept the place breathing. A few of his neighbors used to thank him. Norma Blanchard, who lived 3 doors down, often brought him iced tea in the summer while he trimmed weeds by the bank. Eddie Granger, the retired mechanic, helped him build a footbridge for the children. The creek connected them all in small, simple ways. Nobody thought it was a problem, not until Margot Leary moved in. Margot had a way of making everything feel like a business meeting, polished, confident, and obsessed with perfection. Within months of becoming HOA president, she started sending out letters about curb appeal improvements, fences too tall, lawns too brown, paint too faded. When she saw the creek running behind Devin's yard, she called it an eyesore. Devin had laughed when he first heard it. An eyesore? It's a creek, not a dump, he told Norma. But Margot wasn't joking. She sent out a survey, held a vote, and convinced half the board that the creek was attracting mosquitoes and rodents. Devin tried to explain that it was a natural drainage line, that the water had somewhere to go when it rained. But Margot's mind was made up. She wanted it gone. On the morning they brought in the contractor, Devin woke up to the rumble of machinery outside his window. Trucks, workers in neon vests, piles of rebar. He rushed out, waving his arms. "You can't just fill that in," he shouted. "That's a waterway." The foreman, a short man with a clipboard, barely looked up. "We got approval from the board, sir. You'll have to take it up with them." He did. He called, emailed, even printed county maps showing flood zones. Margot's response was short and smug. "We appreciate your concern, Mr. Rucker. The HOA has determined the area is non-essential drainage. The improvement will enhance community value." Now, standing in the middle of the flood, those words burned in his mind. Non-essential drainage. He watched his neighbors bail water from their garages with buckets, watched kids cry as toys floated away. He saw the reflection of streetlights ripple over what used to be a playground. And the thing that hurt the most, he had seen it coming. Every drop of it. The rescue crews waded through the neighborhood late into the night. The current was strong in some areas, forcing residents to move upstairs. News vans lined the street by dawn. Someone handed Devin a blanket and asked if he wanted to speak on camera. He just stared past them, toward the buried creek. The ground beneath the concrete was buckling, trying to breathe. Devin finally whispered, almost to himself, "They thought they could bury nature. Then he turned and walked back to his porch, his shoes making that heavy suction sound against the mud. But this wasn't the beginning of his story. It was the consequence. To understand how a quiet man became the face of a neighborhood disaster, you have to go back a few months to when the fight first started. Before everything turned to chaos, Devin Rucker lived the kind of life most people dream about when they talk about peace and quiet. His home sat on the edge of a cul-de-sac in Wilmington, North Carolina, surrounded by oaks and dogwoods that whispered with every breeze. He worked from home as a technician for a solar company, spending most of his afternoons tending to the creek behind his property. To Devin, that creek wasn't just a patch of moving water. It was a living thing, a reminder that something wild still existed in a place where every mailbox looked the same. Most mornings, he'd walk out with a mug of coffee, barefoot, watching the mist lift off the surface. You could hear frogs, see dragonflies skipping like tiny sparks, and sometimes a raccoon would leave fresh prints along the muddy edge. Devin loved that. He said it made him feel connected, like the world still had rhythm. Neighbors often teased him for his dedication. "Man, you treat that ditch better than I treat my car," Eddie Granger would joke, leaning on his fence with a grin. Devin always laughed back. "You keep your car running, I keep the water moving." Same principle. He'd spend hours pulling debris after heavy rains or trimming reeds when they grew too high. The kids loved his little wooden bridge, 2 planks of cedar with handrails he'd varnished himself. Every Halloween, he strung orange lights across it and set out a bucket of candy at the middle. Parents trusted him. He was the kind of man who noticed if your mailbox leaned too far or if your trash bin got knocked over by the wind. But Devin wasn't loud about it. He never bragged or looked for attention. He just believed people should care for what's theirs and for what connects them. The creek did that. It tied the neighborhood together through the simple act of sharing space. Until Margot came along. When Margot Leary moved into the neighborhood, she made an entrance. Expensive car, 2-story remodel, and a smile that looked permanent but never reached her eyes. Within weeks, flyers appeared in everyone's mailbox announcing her campaign for HOA president. Her slogan was printed in blue cursive, "Bringing order to Oakshire Meadows." Devin didn't even know the place had a problem until she told everyone it did. She won by a landslide, mostly because no one else wanted the responsibility. That's when the letters started. Margot had rules for everything: lawn height, trash can placement, even the color of front doors. People joked about it at first, but her tone made laughter fade quickly. There was something cold in her precision. Devin tried to stay out of it. He'd wave politely when she passed, even when she gave him that faint smile that seemed to judge his muddy boots. But soon enough, she noticed his creak. The first complaint came in a letter. Thick envelope, HOA seal. Bold text. It claimed the creek was a potential habitat for disease-carrying insects and detrimental to neighborhood appearance. Devin read it twice, then walked straight over to Margot's house. She opened the door wearing gardening gloves, her front yard lined with manicured hedges and perfectly spaced tulips. Devin kept his tone even. "Margot, I got your letter. The creek isn't a hazard. It's part of the county's drainage system. You start filling that in, you'll flood half this street." Margot smiled tightly. "Devin, I understand your attachment, but the HOA has received multiple complaints. We're simply maintaining standards." "Standards?" Devin repeated. "It's a stream. Nature doesn't follow HOA rules." Her expression never changed. "Then maybe it's time it did." She closed the door before he could reply. From that day on, Devin noticed her walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, jotting notes, whispering with neighbors. Some of them began avoiding his eye, pretending to be on phone calls when he waved. Others, like Norma, still supported him. "She's got too much time and not enough kindness," Norma said one afternoon, shaking her head. "You keep doing what's right, Devin. People will see it." He hoped she was right, so he started documenting everything. Photos, dates, rainfall records. He knew if Margot pushed this, he'd need proof. He even reached out to a county environmental office who confirmed the creek was an active drainage route. They'd need a permit to alter it, the clerk told him. Make sure they know that. Devin forwarded that email to the HOA board. No one responded. Not even a thank you. The next week, a sign went up at the entrance of the neighborhood. Community Beautification Project coming soon. That was the first time Devin felt a shift. Something brewing that no one wanted to talk about. He saw it in the way people averted their eyes, in the silence that followed whenever he brought it up. It wasn't fear exactly. More like people choosing convenience over confrontation. He told Norma over coffee one morning, "They're going to do something stupid, and when it backfires, everyone will act surprised." She sighed, staring at the creek shimmering in the sun. That's how it always goes. Nobody listens until they're ankle-deep in their own mistake. But Devin didn't know how right she was. Not yet. Because the day those trucks rolled in, everything he'd warned them about was already set in motion. The first meeting about the Creek project took place in Margot Leary's living room on a Wednesday evening. She'd set out bottled water, gluten-free cookies, and a neat stack of typed agendas. Devin sat across from her at the end of a long dining table, his folder full of photos and printouts. The blinds were half closed, and the faint hum of her air purifier filled the silence as residents trickled in, some curious, others cautious. Margot stood at the head of the table with her signature confidence, her posture as sharp as her tone. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we've received multiple complaints about the creek running behind the Rucker property. We believe it's contributing to our mosquito issue and bringing down property values." Devin leaned forward. "Hold on, Margot. You make it sound like I own the creek. It's county land, and it's part of the natural drainage for this neighborhood. You block it, you're asking for floods." A few residents glanced at each other. Some fidgeted. Margot didn't flinch. "Devin, we've reviewed your concerns. But let's be honest, that waterway is an eyesore. It overflows every year, and you've been maintaining it on your own without authorization. If anything, you've been interfering." That last word hit him like a jab. Interfering? I'm keeping it from clogging. If I hadn't cleared it last spring, half of Oak Street would have been underwater. Margot folded her hands. "Exaggeration doesn't help, Mr. Rucker. We've already consulted a landscaping contractor. They're confident the area can be reinforced and improved. Concrete channels, smooth surfaces, no standing water." Eddie Granger raised a hand. "So, you're going to pave over the creek?" "It's not paving, Mr. Granger," Margot replied, flashing her rehearsed smile. "It's controlled landscaping." Devin couldn't hold back. "Controlled landscaping? You're talking about pouring cement into a living stream. You can't just kill a waterway because it doesn't match your flower beds." The room shifted, a mix of murmurs, side glances, and polite discomfort. Margot's eyes narrowed just enough to show irritation. "Let's keep emotions in check. We'll take a vote, as required by HOA bylaws. Majority rules." Devin looked around the room. Neighbors he'd helped with yard work, fixed gutters for, shared cookouts with. Now they were avoiding his gaze. When the vote came, 7 hands went up in favor, only 2 against. Margot gave a satisfied nod. "Motion passes. We'll begin the project within the next month." Devin gathered his papers and stood up slowly. "You're making a mistake. And when it rains, you'll all remember this moment." Margot's reply was soft but cutting. "Let's hope you're wrong, Devin." That night, he couldn't sleep. Rain tapped the windows, light but steady. He went outside, flashlight in hand, and stood at the edge of the creek. The water moved quietly under the beam, carrying leaves and fragments of twigs. It looked harmless, gentle. Hard to believe something so calm could become dangerous, if suffocated. By the weekend, rumors spread fast. People said the project would make the neighborhood look more professional. Others claimed it would increase property values. Devin became the guy who overreacted. Even Norma, his closest ally, admitted, "They think you're being dramatic, Dev. You know how folks get when someone questions authority." "I'm not questioning," he said, rubbing his temples. "I'm warning them." A week later, a letter arrived from the HOA, formal, stamped, and cold. It read, "Dear Mr. Rucker, due to continued interference and unauthorized maintenance activities, We request that you cease all work around the creek area, effective immediately. Further violations may result in penalties or fines as outlined in HOA policy." He laughed out loud reading it, a dry, bitter sound. "So now taking care of my own yard's a violation," he muttered. He set the letter on the counter, grabbed his camera, and took pictures of the creek again. Every angle, every slope, every storm drain feeding into it. He sent copies to the county's environmental division with a simple note. "They're planning to fill this in. No permit. Please advise." The county replied 2 days later. "We're reviewing the case. Construction should not proceed without proper authorization." He printed that email and hand-delivered it to Margot's mailbox. The next morning, it was gone. Not acknowledged. Not mentioned. Just gone. Devin's frustration grew by the day. He felt the tension every time he walked outside. The stares, the whispers. The HOA meetings became colder. He wasn't invited to the next one at all. A neighbor told him, "They're calling you the problem guy. Margot says you're trying to make her look bad." He sighed. She's doing a fine job of that herself. Still, he didn't stop. Devin started calling local offices, asking about drainage laws, permits, flood risks. He spoke to a hydrologist from the county who told him, if they pour concrete without redirecting flow, the water's going to find its way back, maybe into people's homes. That single line stuck in his head. Water always finds its way back. He printed that, too, highlighted it, posted it on his fridge as a reminder. Margot, meanwhile, was preparing for her victory. Flyers went out about the Community Improvement Project, complete with mock-up photos of clean, paved paths and landscaped greenery. People smiled again, ready for change, not realizing what kind of change was coming. But Devin could feel it. Like pressure building behind a dam, silent but unstoppable. Because once that first truck arrived, there'd be no turning back. The trucks came early. Too early for a Saturday morning. Devin was sipping his first cup of coffee when the sound of diesel engines broke the stillness. He stepped outside in his slippers and saw a convoy rolling down Oakshire Lane. Flatbeds carrying rebar, cement mixers, and stacks of wooden forms. Workers in neon vests stepped out, stretching, laughing, completely unaware of what they were about to do. Devin felt his stomach twist. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, setting his mug on the porch railing. The HOA had ignored every warning, every email. They were really doing it. He walked toward the noise, phone already in hand, recording. "Hey," he called to one of the workers. "What's this for?" The man checked his clipboard. "Creek channel fill," he said casually. "We're sealing off the drainage line. Orders from the HOA board." Devin blinked. "You mean you're filling it completely?" The worker shrugged. "Just following instructions, sir." By now, a few neighbors had wandered out in robes and slippers, drawn by the commotion. Margot appeared from her driveway, dressed like she'd been waiting for this day. Khakis pressed, hair pinned, clipboard tucked under her arm. "Morning, everyone," she called cheerfully. "Big day for Oakshire Meadows. This is the start of our beautification project." Devin approached her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Margot, you don't have a permit." "I've already confirmed it with the county. You can't alter a drainage path without clearance." She smiled like someone indulging a stubborn child. "We're not altering it. We're improving it. The contractor assured me the concrete will help manage runoff." "Manage?" Devin snapped. "You're blocking it." "Water doesn't just vanish when you pour cement on it, Margot. It'll back up into people's yards." A few neighbors murmured, uneasy now. Margot lifted her clipboard. "We've already taken a vote. You lost. Let's not make a scene." Devin stared at her for a long second, then said quietly, "You think a vote changes physics?" Her expression didn't falter, but her jaw tightened slightly. "Mr. Rucker, please step aside and let the professionals do their work." He didn't move. The foreman walked up, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, we're on a tight schedule. I can't delay my crew." Devin turned his phone so the camera faced him and said clearly, "This is unauthorized construction on a public drainage route. I've warned you in writing and in person. You go through with this, I'll report it." The foreman glanced at Margot. She waved her hand dismissively. "Do your job," she said. And they did. By noon, the first layers of concrete were poured. The sound of the mixer echoed across the neighborhood, that steady churn, that wet slap of cement hitting earth. Devin stood there watching as grey slurry smothered the creek he'd tended for years. The smell was sharp, almost metallic. He could feel the ground trembling under the machinery. Norma walked up beside him, her voice low. "They really did it." "Yeah," he said softly. "They just buried a living thing." For hours he filmed, documenting every stage. Workers in hard hats tamping down soil, smoothing wet concrete with trowels, laughing about weekend plans. He wanted every second on record. Maybe someday, when the water came, they'd remember this sound, the sound of arrogance hardening. By the time the last truck pulled away, the creek was gone, replaced by a narrow grey channel that glistened under the afternoon sun. It looked artificial, lifeless. Even the birds seemed confused, circling overhead before flying off toward the woods. That evening, Devin sat on his porch with Norma and Eddie, the three of them staring in silence. Eddie broke it first. "Looks clean? I'll give her that. But man, that don't look right." "It's not," Devin replied. "You block water, it finds another path. Always does." He sent his footage to the county that night, attaching a timestamp and his correspondence with the HOA. His email ended with, "This will cause flooding. Please intervene before it's too late." 2 days later, he got an automated response. "Your complaint has been received and will be reviewed." Weeks went by. Nothing happened. Margot strutted around like she'd saved the neighborhood. She even held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for her community restoration project. Balloons, refreshments, and a banner that read, "Oakshire Creek Renewal." Devin didn't attend. He watched from his porch as families posed for pictures beside the concrete channel, smiling like it was a new park. Norma shook her head. "They're celebrating a time bomb." "Yeah," Devin said quietly. "They just don't hear it ticking yet." He noticed small things in the following weeks, puddles lasting longer after rain, a faint smell of mildew near the lower yards. The soil wasn't draining the same way, but nobody wanted to talk about it. Not until one night in mid-August, when thunder rolled over Wilmington and the first drops began to fall heavier than anyone expected. But by then, the damage was done. What started as pride was about to turn into panic, and no one was ready for what the storm would bring next. For a few weeks, everything looked normal. The new concrete channel gleamed in the sunlight, and Margot Leary walked the neighborhood like a mayor inspecting her victory. She even wrote a post for the community newsletter titled, "A Fresh Look for Oakshire Meadows." Residents praised her. They liked the way things looked. Neat, uniform, controlled. No more tall grass, no more buzzing insects, no more mess. Devin kept quiet, though inside he was boiling. He still walked by the sealed creek every day, camera in hand, taking notes. He noticed things that others didn't. A faint crack forming where the concrete met the soil, small puddles that lingered for days after rain, patches of grass turning yellow. The air even smelled different, damp and stale. Nature was reacting, but no one wanted to admit it. "Let it go, Dev," Norma said one afternoon as they sat on her porch. "They won't listen until they see it with their own eyes." He shook his head. "By then it'll be too late. You can't stop water. You can only guide it. They think they're in charge, but they're not." Norma handed him a glass of iced tea. "Sometimes people need to feel the consequence to learn the lesson." He sighed and looked toward the sky. The air had grown heavier lately, sticky, humid, the kind of heat that promised a storm. That weekend, a few kids played basketball near the cul-de-sac. When their ball bounced into the concrete channel, one of them climbed down to get it. "It's all dry," he yelled, slapping the ground. "Feels weird, like a parking lot." Devin watched from his porch, uneasy. "Tell your folks to keep you out of there," he called. The boy nodded and ran back to his friends. But Devin knew that surface wouldn't stay dry for long. He spent the next few days reviewing his files, every email, every photo, every timestamp. The folder on his computer was labeled HOA Creek Violation. He wasn't planning to sue anyone. He just wanted the record straight when things went wrong. The county still hadn't replied beyond the automated message. He called again, waited on hold for 40 minutes, then finally reached a clerk named Peter Lang. "Mr. Rucker, yes, we've seen your file," Peter said, sounding tired. "But there's a backlog of environmental cases. Unless there's immediate danger, it'll take time." Devin rubbed his forehead. "So you're telling me they can block a drainage system and we just wait for immediate danger?" "I understand your frustration," Peter replied. "But there are procedures. We'll notify you if an inspection is scheduled." Devin hung up without another word. Procedures. That's what people said when they didn't want to take responsibility. Later that evening, Margot stopped by his property. She stood at the edge of his yard, hands on hips, voice calm but sharp. "Devin, I'd appreciate it if you stopped spreading false information about the creek project." He looked at her, arms crossed. "You mean facts? Because the last time I checked, flooding doesn't care about HOA rules." She gave a tight smile. "You're stirring fear. People are anxious enough. They should be," he said. "You buried a waterway." Margot's smile dropped. "We improved our neighborhood, Mr. Rucker. Some people just can't stand change." She turned and walked off before he could reply. That night, Devin recorded a short video for himself, a personal log. He sat at his kitchen table, talking straight to the camera. "It's July 29th. The creek's been filled for 3 weeks. Rain's been light, but the ground's not drying. If the storm that's coming hits us full on, Oakshire's going under. I'm saving this clip because when it happens, they'll say no one warned them." He closed the laptop, then stared out the window. The sky had that strange golden tint that comes before summer storms. Beautiful, but tense. In the distance, thunder grumbled. The next few days were quiet but restless. People carried on, washing cars, mowing lawns, planning barbecues. Margot even hosted a garden tour for the HOA members, proudly walking them past the sealed creek. "Looks professional, doesn't it?" she said, smiling for photos. Devin stayed home that day. He sat on his back porch as the wind picked up, rustling the trees. The air felt electric. The first drops hit that evening, light and harmless. But the forecast had changed. A tropical system pushing inland faster than expected. By midnight, rain was steady. By morning, relentless. Devin woke to the sound of water hammering the roof and thunder rolling over the horizon. He stepped onto the porch and saw puddles already forming where the grass used to absorb the runoff. He whispered to himself, "Here it comes." But what he didn't know was that this storm wouldn't just prove him right. It would destroy everything the HOA thought they'd built. By the second morning, the sky had turned the color of wet ash. The rain didn't stop. It only changed moods. Sometimes it came in sheets so heavy you couldn't see your neighbor's porch. Other times it softened, pretending to ease up, only to return with double the force. The gutters on every house in Oakshire Meadows overflowed. Water streamed down driveways, collecting in the yards like someone had left the hose running. Devin Rucker stood at his window watching the storm build its case. He could already tell something was wrong. The water in his backyard wasn't draining. It was rising. A slow, steady swell that reached the legs of his garden chairs, then the steps of his porch. He stepped outside in boots and a raincoat, the sound of thunder rumbling like a warning. He grabbed his phone, filming. "This is exactly what I said would happen," he muttered into the microphone. "The drainage is blocked, and the water has nowhere to go." Down the street, Norma was out too, clutching an umbrella that bent backward in the wind. "Devin!" she yelled. "The Granger's garage is flooding!" He sloshed through knee-deep water to her side. The sight stopped him cold. Eddie Granger's driveway looked like a riverbed, the water rushing toward the street, but finding no escape. The new concrete channel, Margot's beautification project, was underwater, invisible beneath a brown torrent. Eddie stood in the doorway shouting over the storm. "It's coming through the vents! My tools, my boxes, they're floating!" "Get your power off!" Devin shouted back. "Turn off your breaker, now!" Eddie disappeared inside while Norma struggled to stay upright. The current was stronger now, tugging at her legs. Devin grabbed her arm, helping her move to higher ground. All around them, people were shouting, doors slamming, car alarms blaring, dogs barking in panic. Then, as lightning flashed, Devin saw it. The concrete channel was cracking. The water pushed against it like a trapped animal, chunks of soil breaking loose around the edges. The creek wasn't dead. It was fighting back. Margot's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. She stood near her porch, her designer raincoat soaked through, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why is it rising so fast?" she screamed. Devin marched toward her, rain pounding his face. "Because you buried the outlet. The storm drains are backing up. There's nowhere for the runoff to go." She shook her head, panicked. No, the contractor said, "The contractor's gone, Margot," he snapped. "And the water doesn't care about your vote." Her backyard was already submerged. Decorative garden lights flickered underwater. She backed away as one of them sparked, shorting out with a pop. Devin ran to help an elderly couple down the street whose basement had begun to flood. He waded through waist-high water to reach them, his phone still recording every step. Inside their house, the floorboards were buckling, water seeping through the walls like veins. "Grab what you can and head upstairs," he told them. "Don't touch anything electrical." Outside, a car alarm wailed until the current silenced it. The rain showed no mercy. Even the wind seemed to roar with frustration, tearing branches from trees. By afternoon, the entire lower half of Oakshire Meadows was underwater. Power lines flickered, then went dark. The only light came from the flashes of lightning slicing across the grey scum. Devin stood in the doorway of his home, chest heaving, staring at what used to be his backyard. The bridge he'd built for the kids had floated away, its planks drifting like tiny boats. Norma waded over to him, clutching a trash bag filled with dry clothes. "It's bad over by the park," she said breathlessly. "The playground's gone." He nodded, unable to find words. Then he heard a sound he'd never forget. A deep cracking, followed by a rumble like thunder from beneath the ground. The concrete channel was splitting apart. Water gushed through the cracks, carrying chunks of cement downstream, carving its way back to freedom. "Devin!" someone shouted from behind. It was Eddie, drenched and shivering. "It's coming up through the floorboards now." "My house is done." Devin looked around at the chaos, neighbors screaming, debris floating, cars half submerged, and felt a painful mix of anger and sorrow. He'd tried to stop this. Every warning, every email, every late-night worry, all ignored. He turned his camera toward the broken concrete and spoke over the storm, his voice steady despite everything. "This is what happens when people think they can control nature. You can't bury a creek. You can only bury your common sense." By nightfall, emergency crews arrived in boats. The rescue lights cut through the rain, casting eerie red reflections on the waterlogged streets. Families were evacuated one by one, carrying children, pets, and whatever they could salvage. Devin helped where he could, guiding people toward the rescue teams. When it was finally his turn to leave, he looked back one last time at the neighborhood. Margot stood alone on her porch steps, soaked and trembling, watching her once perfect garden sink beneath the flood. For the first time, she looked small. The rescuer nudged Devin toward the boat. "Come on, man, we gotta move." Devin climbed in, his eyes locked on the water rushing over what used to be his home. He whispered under his breath, "Told you it would find its way back." But even as the rain began to fade, the real storm was just beginning. The blame, the lawsuits, and the fight for accountability that would tear the community apart. When the rain finally stopped, silence hung over Oakshire Meadows like smoke after a fire. The water didn't drain right away. It lingered, heavy and brown, swallowing lawns and driveways. What used to be a neighborhood now looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Piles of furniture lined the streets, soaked carpets hung over fences, and the smell of mildew crept into every home. 3 days later, the emergency crews were gone. The county posted flood warnings, and insurance adjusters began circling the area like vultures. That's when the real chaos began. Devin Rucker stood at the edge of what used to be his backyard, his boots sinking in mud. He could still see remnants of the concrete channel under the silt, jagged, broken slabs poking through like gravestones. The creek had reclaimed its path, but at a cost. Across the street, Margot Leary was directing a group of residents, clipboard still in hand, her tone sharp as ever. "Everyone needs to document damages for the insurance claim." she said. "The board will be reviewing all losses." Devin couldn't believe what he was hearing. "The board?" he said, walking toward her. "You mean the same board that caused the flood?" Margot looked up, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but still defensive. "This isn't the time for accusations. We're all victims here." "Victims?" Devin's voice rose. "You poured concrete into a live creek. I told you exactly what would happen. You ignored the warnings, and now you're standing here pretending this was an act of God?" A small crowd started to form. Neighbors, some angry, some embarrassed, watched the confrontation. Eddie Granger stepped forward, his arms crossed. "He's right, Margot. We voted on your word. You said it was safe." Margot's voice cracked slightly. "The contractor assured us the design would handle runoff." Devin pulled a folder from under his arm, pages warped and damp. "I have every email, every message. You didn't get a county permit. You didn't consult the environmental office. You just decided to bury a drainage line because it didn't fit your idea of aesthetic." She stared at him, lips trembling. "We were trying to make things better." "Better?" he said, gesturing around. "Take a look. Kids can't even play outside. Basements are destroyed. We lost power for 2 days because the transformer flooded. Does this look better to you?" The silence that followed was heavier than the rain had been. A few residents nodded quietly. Norma stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Margot, you wanted order. Now look at us. We're knee-deep in the mess you ordered." Margot's eyes welled up, but she turned away. "This isn't all on me," she said. "The board approved it." "On your recommendation?" Eddie muttered. Devin didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. "You can't just blame a contractor and walk away," he said. "I've already contacted the county again. They're sending an environmental inspector this week. You might want to get your paperwork ready." Margot froze. "You reported us?" He nodded. "I did. Someone has to." Later that evening, a few neighbors gathered at Devin's house, their tone different from before. The same people who once avoided him now wanted to talk. "You tried to warn us," one man admitted. "We didn't believe it could get this bad." Devin poured coffee for them all. "I didn't want to be right," he said quietly. "But water doesn't play politics. It just follows the laws of gravity." That night, a county inspector named Ellen Pritchard showed up earlier than expected. She was in her 40s, practical, wearing waterproof boots and holding a clipboard. "I've seen a lot of flood damage," she said, surveying the cracked cement. "But this is something else." Devin led her through the area, explaining what happened. Ellen knelt beside the broken concrete, running her hand along the edge. "You can't block a natural channel without hydrological studies or permits. Whoever authorized this is in serious violation of state law." Margot approached cautiously. "We didn't know," Ellen cut her off. "You should have. These rules exist for a reason. This isn't cosmetic damage. You've redirected a watershed." Devin said nothing. For once, he didn't need to. The evidence was right there in front of them. Concrete chunks, standing water, debris. As Ellen took photos, Margot stepped aside, her face pale. The neighborhood's beautification project was officially under investigation. The next morning, word spread like wildfire. Local news vans parked at the entrance to Oakshire Meadows. Reporters interviewed residents as drones filmed the flooded streets. Devin stayed quiet, answering questions when asked, but refusing to gloat. That evening, as the sun sank behind the soggy rooftops, he sat on his porch beside Norma. She handed him a cup of coffee and said, "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Being right but still losing everything, he nodded slowly. "I didn't want to win. I just wanted them to listen." But the flood wasn't the end. It was only the start of a fight that would reach courtrooms, headlines, and force every neighbor to pick a side. By the following week, the HOA's beautification project had turned into a county scandal. Local reporters kept circling Oakshire Meadows, and a headline from the Wilmington Ledger made its way across the state. "Neighborhood faces lawsuit after HOA fills creek with concrete." That was the day Camille Drury called. Devin was sitting on his porch, sorting through damp insurance papers, when his phone buzzed. Her voice was steady, confident, the kind of tone that told you she'd handled worse. "Mr. Rucker, my name is Camille Drury. I'm an environmental attorney based in Durham. I saw the coverage about the creek incident. I'd like to meet and discuss what options you and your neighbors might have. Devin rubbed his forehead, exhausted. Honestly, Ms. Drury, I'm not trying to sue anyone. I just want this fixed before it happens again. Her reply was calm but firm. Sometimes the only way to fix a problem like this is to hold people accountable first. They met the next day at Devin's dining table, papers spread across every inch. Camille was in her late 30s, with clear eyes and a quiet, unflinching way of speaking. She didn't waste words or time. You kept records, she said, flipping through photos. Good. That's half the battle. I didn't plan to be some whistleblower, Devin said, sliding her the HOA letter. I just wanted to take care of the creek. Camille scanned the document. This letter's illegal, she said flatly. They had no authority to order you to stop maintaining a natural drainage route, and the county already has clear environmental regulations. They ignored them. She pointed to a photo of the cracked concrete. That, what they did, is considered unauthorized alteration of a protected waterway. North Carolina law is clear. The HOA can be fined, and if the damage extends to personal property, residents can file civil claims. Devin leaned back. So they really broke the law, she met his eyes. They didn't just break it, they bulldozed through it. That line stuck with him. For the first time since the flood, he felt something other than anger. He felt a path forward. Later that week, Camille arranged a community meeting at the local library. Word spread quickly. Nearly every homeowner showed up, some with clipboards, others with photos of their flooded basements. Margot arrived last, sitting near the back, wearing sunglasses even indoors. Camille stood at the front of the room, poised and collected. Thank you for coming, she began. I've reviewed the situation at Oakshire Meadows, and what happened here is not just a mistake. It's a violation of state and county law. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One man raised his hand. Are you saying the HOA is responsible for all this? Yes, Camille replied. The board authorized illegal construction without permits, directly interfering with a natural watercourse. That's negligence, Margot stood abruptly. Excuse me, Ms. Drury, but the HOA acted with the best information available. The contractor assured us. Camille turned to face her. Do you have the contractor's environmental compliance certificate? Margot hesitated. We didn't receive one. Then your assurance means nothing, Camille said evenly. And unfortunately, ignorance doesn't exempt you from liability. The room fell silent. Devin sat near the front, watching the exchange. He could see the faces of his neighbors shifting, from confusion to anger to realization. For weeks they'd seen themselves as victims of bad luck. Now they understood it was preventable. After the meeting, several residents approached Camille. Some were emotional, some furious. We lost everything, one woman said. Our insurance won't cover flood damage. They called it man-made negligence. Camille nodded, jotting notes. That's consistent. You're going to need collective representation, a civil action against the HOA board, possibly the contractor, and anyone who signed off on the project. The goal isn't revenge, it's restoration. Devin walked her to her car after the meeting. You really think we can win this? He asked. She smiled faintly. You don't need to win. You just need to prove the truth. Nature already did half the work. Over the next few days, Camille helped him organize witness statements. Devin spent hours emailing residents, setting up photo folders, labeling timelines. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of machinery, timestamps, emails, and the inspection reports Ellen Pritchard had filed. Margot, meanwhile, started panicking. She sent out a letter to every homeowner. The HOA will handle all legal matters internally. Cooperation is appreciated. That same letter was forwarded to Camille within hours. She's trying to contain it, Camille said, reading it aloud. That's usually what happens when people realize their authority's slipping. By the end of the week, Camille had filed a preliminary notice with the county and a formal complaint to the State Environmental Board. Local media picked it up instantly. Reporters started showing up again, this time with more pointed questions. Devin became the unofficial spokesperson. Cameras caught him explaining the damage in plain terms, his voice tired but calm. We just want accountability, he told them. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a choice, and we all paid for it. Camille watched from the background, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Later, she told him, "Keep talking. People need to see what happens when pride replaces common sense." He nodded. "You think the HOA will finally back down?" She paused, then said, "Not yet. People like Margot don't surrender. They unravel." But as the lawsuits started to take shape, what no one expected was how fast the story would explode beyond the county, turning Oakshire Meadows into a national example of arrogance, neglect, and one man's fight to make things right. It started with a 30-second clip. A local news station posted Devin's interview on their website, him standing ankle-deep in muddy water beside the broken concrete, saying, "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget where it used to run." Within hours, it spread across social media. Thousands of comments poured in. Some called him a hero. Others couldn't believe a Homeowners Association could be so careless. By the next morning, Oakshire Meadows wasn't just a local story, it was national news. Cable networks picked it up with headlines like "The HOA that flooded itself" and "Concrete Creek Scandal." Devin's inbox filled with messages from reporters, environmental advocates, and even law students wanting to interview him. The attention was overwhelming. He hadn't meant to become the face of a movement, he just wanted his neighborhood fixed. Meanwhile, the residents of Oakshire were in full panic. Half of them wanted to stand with Devin and Camille. The other half wanted the attention gone, afraid it would hurt property values even more. Margot Leary's house became a symbol of everything wrong with the situation. Pristine on the outside, but now surrounded by ruined lawns and angry neighbors. Margot stayed indoors most days, but when she did appear, people whispered. She'd gone from admired leader to public scapegoat. News vans parked near her driveway. Drones hovered overhead. One morning she tried to confront a reporter, only to have her words twisted on live TV. This community made decisions collectively. We didn't act alone. The clip went viral again, not for her defense, but for her tone. It came off as deflection. Camille handled the rising publicity like a pro. She organized statements for the press, making sure the residents' voices were heard clearly. "This isn't about punishment," she said during one interview. "It's about responsibility, about people in power thinking they can rewrite the rules of nature." Devin sat beside her, nodding quietly. "We just want our homes to be safe again." The county investigation accelerated under public pressure. Inspectors returned with state officials in tow, taking soil samples, measuring water depth, and photographing structural damage. The environmental report confirmed everything Devin had warned them about. The concrete had blocked a regulated drainage path. The HOA had acted without permits, without hydrological consultation, and in direct violation of state law. The findings went public within 48 hours. The state ordered the HOA to remove all remaining concrete and restore the creek to its original form, a project estimated to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The board members were named personally responsible for the damages. When Camille told Devin the news, he didn't celebrate. He just sat back and exhaled, his shoulders dropping for the first time in months. "I guess they're finally listening," he said. Camille smiled slightly. "Listening's the easy part. Fixing it, that's where the real work begins." The cleanup drew even more media attention. Crews arrived with excavators to dig out the concrete, hauling it away piece by piece. Reporters filmed as water finally began to flow again, the first trickle glinting under the sun like a quiet act of defiance. Children gathered to watch, cheering when the creek returned to life. For Devin, it felt like watching something come back from the dead. But not everyone was cheering. At the next HOA meeting, held in a local community center since Margot's house was now off-limits to cameras, the atmosphere was hostile. Residents demanded answers. Margot sat at the head of the table, pale and trembling but still trying to maintain authority. "I understand your anger," she began, voice wavering. "But this was never meant to harm anyone." "We believed," a man interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "You believed? You cost us tens of thousands of dollars. My insurance denied coverage because this wasn't a natural disaster. It was your decision. Others joined in, shouting, demanding resignations. Norma stood up and said what everyone else was thinking. Margot, you treated nature like a nuisance. You buried it under concrete, and now you're buried in the mess you made. Margot's composure cracked. She started crying, whispering that she hadn't known, that she'd only wanted the neighborhood to look presentable. But it was too late. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president that night. Outside the meeting, reporters waited for Devin. One asked, "Do you feel vindicated?" He paused before answering. "No, because none of this should have happened. If one person had just stopped to listen, this whole mess could have been avoided." The video clip of that statement went viral again, racking up millions of views. Environmental groups began referencing the Oakshire case in public forums. Devin's simple warning, "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget," became a quote shared across articles and even used in lectures about community planning. Camille told him later, "You realize you've started something bigger than your neighborhood, right?" He smiled faintly. "I didn't start it. Margot's concrete did." For the first time in months, Devin slept through the night. The rain returned a week later, soft, steady, harmless. He stood on his porch watching it, the creek behind his yard, whispering its way downstream, clear and alive. But even as the water flowed freely again, Devin knew the real lesson wasn't about floods or lawsuits. It was about pride, and how far people will go to control what was never theirs to begin with. The reckoning, though, was still to come. By the time the last of the concrete was hauled away, Oakshire Meadows didn't look like the picture-perfect neighborhood it once pretended to be. The lawns were scarred with deep tire marks from the construction trucks. Piles of wet debris lined the sidewalks. But there was something different in the air, a kind of fragile honesty. People weren't pretending anymore. They waved to each other again, talked openly about what happened, and even helped one another repair the damage. The flood had washed away more than dirt. It had stripped off the layer of pride that once held the place together. Devin Rucker became the quiet anchor of that recovery. He never wanted recognition, but neighbors started coming to him for advice, asking about proper drainage or how to reseed waterlogged soil. He'd walk the creek every morning, shovel in hand, clearing branches, checking the flow. The water moved freely now, carrying small leaves downstream, whispering against the rocks like a reminder that balance had returned. One afternoon, as he worked near the bank, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Need an extra pair of hands?" It was Margot. She looked different. Smaller somehow. Humbled. Gone were the pressed khakis and perfect hair. She wore jeans, a faded sweatshirt, and boots splattered with mud. Devin hesitated, leaning on his shovel. "You sure you want to get dirty?" he asked. She smiled weakly. "I think I've done enough damage sitting clean." For a long moment, they just stood there listening to the creek. Then she knelt down and started picking up bits of broken concrete, scattered in the mud. "I wanted it to look perfect," she said quietly. "Everything in my life has always been about order. I thought if I could make the neighborhood look beautiful, I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere." Devin watched her for a while, then said, "You don't fix belonging by controlling everything around you. You fix it by caring for what's already alive." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I learned that the hard way." They worked side by side for an hour, clearing debris without saying much else. When she left, she thanked him, really thanked him, and promised to help with restoration efforts. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The restoration project lasted months. County workers and volunteers rebuilt the creek's natural banks using rocks, native plants, and small retaining walls that allowed water to breathe again. Devin helped oversee it all, with Camille Drury coordinating the legal side. The HOA, under new leadership, voted unanimously to dissolve Margot's old beautification plan and establish an environmental committee instead. At the first meeting of that committee, Devin spoke in front of his neighbors. His voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath it, the kind that comes from seeing people finally understand what you'd been trying to tell them all along. "We built this place thinking we could control everything," he said. "The grass, the fences, the rules. But nature doesn't follow our blueprints. It doesn't care about votes or opinions. It just is. When we respect that, it takes care of us. When we fight it, it reminds us who's in charge. The room was quiet. Some nodded, others wiped tears. Even Camille, who rarely showed emotion, smiled faintly. After the meeting, she pulled Devin aside. "You know, I've handled a lot of environmental cases," she said. "Most end in fines or bitterness. But what happened here? It actually changed people." Devin looked toward the creek shimmering in the distance. Maybe that's what it was supposed to do. Weeks later, when the last of the restoration was complete, he stood by the rebuilt bridge, stronger this time, with thick cedar planks and steel reinforcements. The kids were back, tossing stones into the water, their laughter echoing through the air. Norma waved from her porch, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. He walked over, sat beside her, and took the glass. "Feels strange," he said, "seeing it all fixed after everything." She smiled. "Funny thing about disasters. They tear things down, but they also show what's worth rebuilding." He nodded, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes you have to lose control to remember what matters." A few houses down, Margot was planting new shrubs along her yard. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but healthy. She glanced up and waved to Devin. This time, he waved back. The story of Oakshire Meadows slowly faded from the headlines, but the lesson stayed. It became a quiet warning whispered in community meetings across the state. "Don't bury what keeps you alive." Devin's quote hung on a plaque near the creek entrance, installed by the new HOA. "You can't bury a creek and expect it to forget where it used to run." He read it once, smiled, and kept walking, the sound of flowing water following him like an old friend. Then, as if speaking to the viewers of his story, his voice echoed softly in reflection. "People always talk about control, about keeping everything neat, tidy, safe. But control's an illusion. The real strength is in balance, knowing when to guide and when to step back. Remember that the next time you think you can outsmart nature, or people," he glanced once more at the creek, then at the neighborhood beyond it, scarred but standing. "And if this story taught you something about pride, patience, or the price of ignoring what's natural, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons don't come from books or speeches. They come from the water that refuses to stop flowing."